Well, one of Uncle Lou's favorite punching bags has emerged from college football obscurity. He's packed up his revival tent and he's heading down to the plains to take the head coaching job for the Auburn Tigers. I'm talking, of course, about my buddy, the Reverend Hugh Freeze. So, disclaimer or whatever you want to call it, I don't like Hugh Freeze. I can't stand him. I've never liked him. The longer he sticks around in college football, the less I like him. But I'm going to give you my honest opinion on him as a football coach. We could talk about some of the personal stuff maybe at some point in this video, but I'm going to give you my opinion on him as a football coach. I mean, believe it or not, I'm capable of not liking someone, but judging fairly their football abilities. I'll give you a great example. Y'all know I don't like Urban Meyer. He's one of the best football coaches of my lifetime, college football coaches. I can't stand the guy. I wouldn't want him anywhere near my team. It's very well documented, my feelings about Urban Meyer. But you can't deny the guy's a hell of a coach. People are going to say, well, whatever you say about Hugh Freeze just because you don't like him. Well, what am I going to say about Hugh Freeze? First of all, I looked some stuff up before I started this video. I wanted to know, there's this narrative out there that he's a great coach because he beat Alabama twice. And look, that ain't easy to do. I'll be the first to tell you. Kirby's a hell of a coach. He ain't beat Bama twice. Now, he doesn't play Bama every year like Ole Miss did, but it seems to be when, like, sort of the glossing over of Hugh Freeze when people are talking about him. It's like, well, he beat Alabama twice, and he won 10 games at Liberty. Those things are all true. Those things are all true, and those are good things. But I dug a little deeper. How good of a coach is Hugh Freeze, really? Well, first of all, let's compare him to Auburn's last two coaches, Bryan Harsin and Gus Malzahn. He's clearly better than Bryan Harsin. I mean, look, that's just a fact. I don't care how much you like Bryan Harsin or hate Hugh Freeze, or like Hugh Freeze and hate Bryan Harsin. Hugh Freeze is a better football coach than Bryan Harsin. More importantly, he fits in, at least within the footprint of the SEC, whereas Bryan Harsin never did. And that does matter. It's not the end-all, be-all. It's not even necessarily a 100% requirement, but it helps. It helps. Bryan Harsin, it helps from a recruiting standpoint, relationships with high school coaches, all that kinds of thing. So, some coaching, some coaches fit certain places, some maybe don't. Luke Fickell, I've long said, I feel like is a fit in the Big Ten footprint of the country. He, of course, has landed at Wisconsin. Brian Kelly, I wasn't sure was going to be a fit in the SEC in general and in LSU in particular. They had a pretty good year, so he appears to be fitting in. Now, if they happen to have a bad year, then maybe people want to come out and say he doesn't fit in. I don't know. But anyway, so Hugh Freeze, to me, is clearly an upgrade over what Auburn has had the last couple of years, which is Bryan Harsin. I wasn't high on the Bryan Harsin hire from the get-go. There weren't very many people that were, and it crashed and burned in spectacular fashion. And like I said, no matter how much you like or dislike either one of those two individuals, there is really no debate Hugh Freeze is a better football coach than Bryan Harsin, no matter what metric or measurement you want to use. What about Gus Malzahn? I don't know. That's a little bit harder to figure out. I completely understand the mindset of Auburn fans that wanted Gus Malzahn gone at the time Auburn was in the process of firing him. I get it. You got to remember, I'm a Georgia fan. There came a point in my life where I wanted Mark Richt fired when the guy was averaging 10 wins a year. So I get it. You get to a certain point where good ain't good enough anymore. And I certainly had, my fair share of fun poking fun at Gus Malzahn for some different things, and he struggled mightily against UGA. That was the main reason I wanted Auburn to keep Gus Malzahn. Was a selfish point of view as a Georgia fan. Georgia just completely owned and dominated Gus Malzahn during his time there. So, is Hugh Freeze better than Gus Malzahn? That's debatable. And there's points that you can make on either side of that argument. There are points you can make for Gus Malzahn. There are points you can make for Hugh Freeze. Gus Malzahn went places at Auburn that Hugh Freeze never went at Ole Miss, SEC championship games, and things like that, right? Hugh Freeze never did that at Ole Miss. And you say, well, Auburn was a much better spot to be in than Ole Miss was. That's probably a little bit of truth to that, too. The sort of calling card of Hugh Freeze, hey, look at me, I beat Alabama twice. That's true. Beat him twice in 5 years. That is true. We're going to talk about more about his record in a second. Beat him twice in 5 years. Gus Malzahn beat him, 3 times in 7 years or something like that? So pretty similar there, really, when you look at it that way. Again, you can say, well, Auburn has more resources. Auburn has, okay, whatever. I'm just telling you what their records are. Those are things I think everyone knows about Hugh Freeze. Was at Ole Miss, beat Alabama twice, had that 10-win season, made it to a New Year's Six game, right? Left. And again, everyone knows why. Maybe we'll get into some of that at the end. Goes to Liberty. What does everybody say about his time at Liberty? Just right now, what do you think about Hugh Freeze's time at Liberty? Well, he won 10 games. Yes, he did win 10 games back in 2020. What's he done since then? 5 losses in 2021, 4 losses in 2022 at Liberty. 9 losses at Liberty in the last 2 seasons. This is a theme. Let's go back and look at his time at Ole Miss. Yes, he beat Alabama twice. Yes, he had a 10-win season. Let's take a look at his entire time at Ole Miss. He was there from 2012 to 2016. The best year was 2015. That was one of the 2 years that he beat Bama. That was his most successful year at Ole Miss. He went 10-3. It's pretty good. Lane Kiffin did that last year, by the way, won 10 games there. So 2015 was Hugh Freeze's best year at Ole Miss. They went 10-3. What about his other years? Never lost less than 4 games. Not a single time. 4 losses, 5 losses, 6 losses, 7 losses. In Hugh Freeze's 5 years at Ole Miss, he lost 3 games, 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, 7 games. Only the 10-win season where he went 10-3. Every single year, other than that, he lost 4 or more games. Fast forward to what we just talked about with Liberty. Yeah, he went 10-1 in 2020, his first year at Liberty. Some people might say he was playing with other people's players, but he went 10-1. The following year, he lost 5 games. That was in 2021. And then this current season, it just wrapped up, they lost 4. So between Ole Miss and Liberty, Hugh Freeze was a head coach for 8 years. Twice, he lost 3 games or less. Twice out of those 8 years. 6 out of those 8 years, he lost 4 games or more. I feel like the narrative on Hugh Freeze gets stuck on the he beat Bama twice thing. And again, while that is true, that is clearly not the whole story of Hugh Freeze. He's had really 2 what you would consider to be really good years, 10-plus wins. Once at Ole Miss out of 5 years, once at Liberty out of 3 years. I'm not saying that to say he's a bad coach. I'm saying that to say that it surprised me when I looked these numbers up. Because the talking points you hear about Hugh Freeze tend to focus on one of 2 things. Number 1, it all focuses on the positive. Oh, Hugh Freeze is a good coach. He beat Bama twice. And that's all they say. And you hear it over and over and over and over and over again. It starts to beat into your brain. Like, I guess Hugh Freeze is really good. He beat Bama twice. That's all anybody says. And then fast forward to his time at Liberty, and they go, hell, he went 10-1 at Liberty. Yeah, he went 10-1 in a COVID year. 10 wins. That's great. And they stop right there. That's one of the things you hear about Hugh Freeze. The other side of the spectrum, all the bad shit, and there's a lot of bad shit. He was cheating at Ole Miss, got caught. He was literally buying players. It's not a question of false accusations or whether or not it was proven. It was 100% proven. Hell, you had Ole Miss players getting drafted and then giving an interview at the draft talking about all the money Ole Miss paid him. It was mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing. And then you have the issues also at Ole Miss where he was calling prostitutes from a phone provided to him by Ole Miss. In other words, like a work phone. And the assumption, well, I guess you can assume one of 2 things. He either was calling those prostitutes as a recruiting tool, right, for high school kids that were coming to visit Ole Miss, or he was calling them for himself. Now, one of the issues with Hugh Freeze that I have personally, and again, this doesn't have anything to do with his coaching ability, but while we're bringing all this up, Hugh Freeze is one of those people that puts his religion out front all of the time for everyone to see. Talks about it constantly, kind of the old saying, beating you over the head with the Bible type of deal. I don't have a problem with someone choosing to do that. I don't. But people that choose to do that have got to understand that when things like what happened to Hugh Freeze happen, it's a weird look, to say the least. A weird look, to say the least. But anyway, he rehabilitated himself, right? He sat out for 2 or 3 seasons. Was it 2 or 3? 3 seasons. He was out of football altogether. Major football. 16 was his last year at Ole Miss. He sort of got busted at the end of the 15 season. They investigated into the 16 season. He was still there in 16. They went 5-7 that year, and Ole Miss fired him. He took 3 years off, 17, 18, and 19, and was hired by none other than Liberty University in 2020, whose athletic director, by the way, how many of you know this? The athletic director at Liberty was the athletic director at Baylor during the rape and sexual abuse cover-up scandal that went on there. He was ran out of town on a rail from Baylor, accused, at least in part, of participating in some of that cover-up situation that was going on Baylor with rape and sexual abuse. No problem. Liberty opened him welcomed him with open arms, just like they did Hugh Freeze. And Hugh Freeze had the one good year there, 10-1 his first year, great year. Can't take anything away from him there. But 8-4 the year after, and 8-4 this year. So now all of that stuff, the sort of the religious angle, really doesn't have anything to do with how he may or may not do at Auburn. It's got nothing to do with it. The cheating could, I've heard it presented 2 different ways. You got the camp that'll say, look, the guy won 10 games at Ole Miss. He must be a pretty good coach. He beat Bama twice. He must be a pretty good coach. And then you got the other guy that'll go, yeah, but he was cheating. He bought all his players. They had to vacate all those wins, so they're not even really wins. And then you got the first guy again that goes, yeah, but now what Hugh Freeze was doing at Ole Miss is legal. Partly true. The school can't technically pay players, right, which is what was going on at Ole Miss. But through NIL, of course, boosters can now pay players in recruits. So that person is partly right to say that what Hugh Freeze was doing at Ole Miss that was illegal at the time is now legal. That's partly right. But to me, that's not the issue, right? Because they're using that to say he'll be just as successful at Auburn as he was at Ole Miss. Yeah, he was buying players at Ole Miss, and it was against the rules, but now he can buy players at Auburn, and it's not against the rules, so he should be just as successful. Well, the problem is everyone is buying the players now because it's legal. Is Hugh Freeze, in other words, has he learned his lesson? So the line has been moved, right? When Hugh Freeze was at Ole Miss, the line was here. You can't pay players, blah, 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 right? He paid them anyway, stepped way over the line. Well, now the line is here. Players can get paid through the NIL process, right? Well, does Hugh Freeze step over that line? I think that's a legitimate concern you have to have when you hire someone who is a known cheat. I want you to ask yourself this. Would you be okay right now with whatever team you're a fan of hiring Jeremy Pruitt as anything, as a defensive coordinator, as a position coach, as anything? Given what we know now happened at Tennessee under Jeremy Pruitt, and this isn't a bash Tennessee thing. That's not where I'm going with this. Would you want your team dipping their toes in that water? Would you want them to bring Jeremy Pruitt in? Jeremy Pruitt's an elite defensive mind. You think what you want about his head coaching ability or his character or the fact that he was buying and cheating at Tennessee or whatever. He is an elite defensive mind. But would you want your team to bring him in right now? I wouldn't. And I wouldn't want my team to bring Hugh Freeze in either. Partly because I don't like either of those two people. That's a personal deal. It's got nothing to do with their football ability, though. Where football comes into it for me is, it seems to me if you bring in somebody like a Hugh Freeze or a Jeremy Pruitt, a known cheater, someone who has been busted, caught red-handed, it seems to me like you are inviting a lot of eyeballs onto your program that you would rather not have. It seems to me the NCAA is going to set up shop in Auburn and keep a very close eye on Hugh Freeze and that entire staff and everything that's going on there. I wouldn't want that. I don't think anybody would want that. Think about whatever job you have, even. No matter what type of job it is. Do you like someone standing over your shoulder constantly, looking at everything you're doing, micromanaging type of deal? It's like that. I don't think anybody really wants that. So what do I think about overall Auburn hiring my good buddy, Hugh Freeze. I don't like it from a personal standpoint, and I don't like it from a, if this was my team standpoint. I would be against this 100% if I was an Auburn fan. I would be against it 100% if Georgia ever wanted to bring in a Hugh Freeze or a Jeremy Pruitt type person. I'd be against it 100%. But that's not the case. So what do I think about Hugh Freeze to Auburn just from a pure football standpoint? I think it's a huge improvement over Brian Harsin. I think he will get Auburn back on a winning trajectory. What will that look like ultimately? It's hard to say. It's hard for me to... I'm not going to stand here and predict to you that Auburn's going to win the SEC sometime in the next 3 years just because they hired Hugh Freeze. I am willing to go out on a limb and say I seriously doubt Auburn misses any more bowl games, though. I can't see that happening. It seems to me Hugh Freeze is going to give Auburn a floor of 6 or 7 wins immediately. And once he's there for a couple of years, that floor will raise to 7 or 8. As far as anything beyond regular season and what the expectation should be for Hugh Freeze, you have to keep in mind, I know we have transfer portal stuff now, and I know we have NIL stuff now, and maybe Auburn gets it turned around really, really quick, but there is a huge talent deficiency at Auburn right now. Auburn fans know this. It's one of their biggest complaints over the last couple of years. All these players that left, the recruiting is not where it needed to be under Brian Harsin. All of that is true. So there's a huge talent deficiency right now at Auburn. Their quarterback situation is an absolute mess. They're probably losing their best player, Tank Bigsby, to the NFL. Their defense has been kind of up and down the last few years. A lot of that can be fixed quicker than it used to could because of the transfer portal, but how much of it can be fixed quickly because of the transfer portal, we'll see. How enticing of a destination is Auburn right now to a potential transfer? We're going to find those things out because it's the wild, wild west right now when it comes to transfer portal and recruiting for that matter. Early signing days in a couple of weeks. The transfer portal's open between now and January 15th. We'll see what Hugh Freeze and staff can do to kind of fill in some of the holes there. I wouldn't predict Auburn doing anything like winning the SEC over the next 3 years with Hugh Freeze. I'd have to see something more from Hugh Freeze than what I've seen so far to go out on a limb to make that prediction. But I do feel comfortable in saying that Hugh Freeze is going to have Auburn consistently in a much better place than Brian Harsin has had in the last 2 years. And I know that's not saying much because it was really bad. But at least for right now, Auburn still has a pretty tough schedule year in and year out, having to play both Alabama and Georgia every single year, right? Plus the rest of the teams in the West. Now, this is going to change a lot over the next couple of years when the SEC expands to 16 teams and does away with divisions. We don't know what Auburn's schedule will look like at that point. I'm assuming they're going to continue to play Georgia and Bama every single year, though, because those are two of the biggest rivals in all of the SEC. So I'm going to, I assume those 2 games will continue. But without knowing what the schedule might look like beyond that, it's hard to really gauge any sort of accurate 3 to 5 year prediction, right, for a team, because we just don't really know. But I'm confident in saying he's going to get Auburn in a better spot than what Harsin had him. I can't predict at this point that Auburn's going to do anything crazy like win the SEC. Now, with the playoffs expanding to 12 teams, not next season, but the season after, is it possible Auburn makes a bowl game in the next, let's say, 3 to 4 years? Yeah, I think that's possible. Now, I want you to keep in mind there's about 40 teams probably that's possible for. If you go back and look over the playoff era, 2014 to now, if you go back and you look at end of season rankings or final playoff rankings, if you'd rather do that, and you look at every team that's in the top 12, count how many different teams you see in there over the last 8 years, from 2014 till now. It's about 40. So, yeah, Auburn is one of about 40 teams who's going to have a shot in any random year at making that 12-team playoff if they fix some of those talent deficiencies. So I actually think it's more likely Auburn makes the playoffs in the next, let's say, 4 years or 5 years than it is they win the SEC. It's going to be easier to make the playoffs in a 12-team format than it is to win the SEC in any random year. Just a fact. For Auburn or anyone else for that matter. It's very hard to win the SEC. But there's going to be 2, 3, possibly 4 SEC teams a year that end up getting into the playoffs. Only one team that wins the SEC. So I could actually see Auburn getting into a playoffs before I could see them actually winning a conference title game anytime in the next 3, 4, 5 years. again, they're going to have to get some more talent in there, and Hugh Freeze is going to have to learn how to color in the lines, and I'm not convinced he will. You know, I'm not convinced he's going to become Auburn's greatest head coach of all time. I am convinced, though, this is a huge upgrade over Brian Harsin. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I tried not to trash talk in this video out because I could do like a 5 or 6 minute deal on Hugh Freeze where I just bury him with things that really don't have anything to do with football. And probably, maybe some of you would enjoy that. I don't know. But this has probably been the most requested coaching video I've had is Hugh Freeze to Auburn. Now, some of that was probably people wanting me to just bury him for 5 or 6 minutes. I tried to give you an honest, my honest thoughts and viewpoints on Hugh Freeze as a football coach as it relates to getting the job at Auburn, without harping and just hounding on the kind of personal stuff or cheating type stuff that he's done in the past. Now, I don't think you can completely separate the two. He's always going to be known as, you know, the guy that got caught cheating at Ole Miss and the prostitute with the cell phone deal. And as far as his whole infatuation with ankles goes, I'm not even going to go there. Nothing surprises me in today's world anymore. You got these, you know, people out here with OnlyFans accounts. You got Feet Finder. So whatever it is Hugh Freeze has going on with ankles, that's his deal. And look, who am I to judge? You know, I don't know. So yeah, that were the ankles though. But so I tried to give you really my honest thoughts on Hugh Freeze and how he might do at Auburn. I hope you enjoyed it. If not, I'll try to do better next time. Have a good morning.